When you think of the word traitor in American history, one name probably pops into your head, right? Benedict Arnold. But what if I told you the story you think you know, the one about a simple, greedy villain, is just the tip of the iceberg? The real story is so much more complicated and, honestly, way more important than you might think. Can you just imagine hearing that? Those were the actual words of George Washington, the commander-in-chief, when he found out his most brilliant general, a man he thought was his friend, had tried to sell a critical fort to the British. The shockwave from that betrayal almost broke the entire American cause. So yeah, everyone knows the name, but the story we all think we know, it's not the whole picture, not even close. You see, before the traitor, there was the hero, and after the betrayal, there was a very carefully constructed villain. We're going to go beyond that simple label to really understand the man, what drove him, and his surprisingly massive legacy. Okay, so to really get Arnold, you first have to understand how his entire story was systematically torn down and then rebuilt in the public mind. After his treason, the Patriots didn't just get mad. They launched a full-on campaign to turn him into this figure of pure, almost cartoonish evil. And they went all in. I mean, the level of effort here is just, wow. They made up stories about him torturing birds as a kid or scattering glass for other children to step on. They paraded these effigies of him, sometimes with two heads to show he was two-faced, through cities and then burned them. His name was literally scraped off of monuments. They even smashed the gravestones of relatives who had the same name. And get this, his family motto, Sibi Totike, which means for himself and for all, they deliberately mistranslated it to wholly for himself just to push this idea that he was selfish from day one. Just look at the monument at Saratoga. It's maybe the most powerful example. It honors the American generals who won that huge battle. There are 3 niches with statues, but the 4th, where Arnold's statue should be, it's just an empty space. It's this powerful, silent statement about a hero who was so completely disowned that he literally became a ghost in his own story. So what was the story they tried so hard to erase? Well, because before he was a traitor, Benedict Arnold was, and this is no exaggeration, one of the most brilliant, bravest, and most effective generals the Continental Army had. Period. I mean, just listen to this resume. He helped capture Fort Ticonderoga. He led this insane, death-defying march through the Maine wilderness to attack Quebec, where he got badly wounded. The very next year, he built a fleet of gunboats from scratch on Lake Champlain that held off a British invasion for a whole year. And then at Saratoga, the absolute turning point of the war, he disobeyed orders, charged right into the thick of it, and shattered his leg again while personally leading the charge that broke the British lines. This guy wasn't just some general. He was a true warrior. And his men, they absolutely loved him for it. Just listen to how one of his soldiers put it. He was as brave a man as ever lived. He wasn't one of those generals who directed the battle from the back. He was right out front, yelling, "Come on, boys," not "Go, boys." That's how you inspire loyalty. You risk it all right there with them. So, what on earth happened? How does a man like that, a real war hero, turn his back on everything he fought for, everything he bled for? Well, it wasn't just one thing. It was this slow burn of what he saw as constant disrespect, a whole cascade of insults that just ate away at him. You know, the trouble started almost right away. Back at Fort Ticonderoga, he shows up with an official commission to lead the attack, but Ethan Allen and his Green Mountain Boys are already there. Arnold was furious, writing that Allen positively insisted I should have no command. It ended in this bizarre joint leadership that left Arnold feeling like his authority was completely undermined, and that was just the first of many fights over who got the credit. And from there, it was just one thing after another. Imagine this. Congress promotes 5 officers who are junior to you right over your head. It was a massive public slap in the face. Then, while he's the military governor of Philadelphia, his political enemies drag him through a court-martial. And even though he's cleared of the serious charges, he still gets a humiliating public reprimand from Washington himself. All of this is happening while he's going broke, having spent his own personal fortune to fund the war. And right into that toxic mess walks his new wife, Peggy Shippen, who came from a big loyalist family, giving him a very convenient, very tempting connection to the British. You know, some people saw it coming. As early as 1777, one of his rivals, Colonel John Brown, made this prediction, and man, was it chillingly accurate. Because while Arnold's complaints were real, there is just no denying that a giant pile of cash was a huge part of this. The British were offering £20,000 for West Point, an absolute fortune that would solve every single one of his problems. And that was it. That was the tipping point. Fueled by this, toxic cocktail of wounded pride, resentment, and straight-up greed, Arnold makes his move. He actually lobbied George Washington for command of the fortress at West Point, the key to the whole Hudson River, with the secret plan of selling it to the British all along. The plot was pretty simple. Arnold would weaken the fort's defenses, then hand the plans over to his British contact, Major John André. But the whole thing fell apart when 3 local militiamen stopped André on the road. They searched him and found the incriminating papers hidden in his boot. Word got back to Arnold just minutes, literally minutes, before George Washington himself showed up for a surprise visit. Arnold panicked, kissed his wife goodbye, and fled to a British warship, saving his own skin. And here's where it gets really weird. Just look at how the 2 conspirators ended up. André, the British spy, was hanged, but he was treated like this tragic, noble figure. Alexander Hamilton said, "Never perhaps did any man suffer death with more justice or deserve it less." He's even got a memorial in Westminster Abbey. Arnold, on the other hand, got away scot-free. But he became an outcast, hated in America, and never really trusted or respected in England. So he got away, but what did he really get? His life after the war was just this frustrating scramble. The British made him a general, but never gave him a real command. He tried to get back into business as a merchant, but his reputation followed him everywhere. There's a story that on his deathbed, he asked to be put back in his old Continental Army uniform. But his real regret probably wasn't his treason. It was that his treason failed to get him the money and glory he so desperately wanted. Okay, so that's the man. But the story doesn't end there. Because the legacy of his treason, that's where things get really wild. We started off asking what pushed him to do it, but maybe the more interesting question is what his treason did for America. I know this is going to sound crazy, but what if a traitor actually saved the American Revolution? It sounds completely backwards, right? How could the worst betrayal in American history actually have been a good thing? Well, some historians argue that, in a really strange way, Benedict Arnold was the exact villain the revolution needed at that exact moment. You have to remember, by 1780, the war had been dragging on for 5 years. The army was starving, Congress was broke, and a lot of people were just done. The biggest threat wasn't the British army anymore, it was American apathy. Arnold's betrayal was like a massive jolt of electricity to the whole system. All of a sudden, this long, grinding war had a face, a villain's face. Hating Benedict Arnold was one thing every single patriot could agree on, and it fired up a sense of common purpose that had been fading fast. And historian Nathaniel Philbrick really hits the nail on the head with this one. Arnold, with all his greed and his ambition, became the perfect symbol of the very thing that was rotting the revolution from the inside, self-interest. By making him the ultimate bad guy, the patriots could define themselves against him and recommit to the idea of the greater good over personal gain. So in the end, the story of Benedict Arnold isn't just about one man. It forces us to ask some really tough questions. He was a traitor, absolutely, but he was also a hero. His betrayal came from his own personal flaws, sure, but it might have accidentally served a vital national purpose. It's a powerful reminder that history is never black and white. Sometimes the line between a hero and a villain is drawn not just by what they did, but by the needs of the story we tell ourselves long after they're gone.